You can wear our name, Lauren, but names don't rewrite blood. You were an outsider the day Nathaniel married you, and a stain we never managed to wash off. That's what Margaret said to me, right there at the dinner table. Crystal glasses full, candles lit, and not a single soul brave enough to speak up. If you've ever been treated like a placeholder in someone else's legacy, if you've ever swallowed your voice just to keep the peace, stay with me. Because this story, it's not just mine. It's yours too. It was early April, and the morning light outside barely cracked through the overcast sky. That sort of pale gray that didn't really feel like morning. It just hovered, pressing down like the weight of an unspoken truth. In the kitchen, the kettle hissed as it finished boiling, and I poured hot water into 2 mugs. One for me, one for Ethan. He was already awake, sitting at the kitchen island in his pajama pants and one of Nate's old t-shirts. His fingers were busy folding napkins into neat triangles, lining them up with the precision no 13-year-old should have. He didn't look up when I set his mug down. "Thanks," he murmured. I watched him for a moment, then sat across from him. We both blew on our tea, steam curling between us like a wall that neither of us wanted to break yet. It had been like this the last few days. Quiet, careful. There was something in the air, something unspoken building between us. "Should I call her Grandma tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. My stomach tightened. He still didn't look at me, eyes focused on the napkin in his hands, smoothing the crease with a deliberate calm. Like if he folded it perfectly enough, he could fold away the question too. I opened my mouth, closed it, then said, "Call her what feels right." He nodded. "What if it doesn't feel like anything?" I reached over, touching his hand, just for a second. "Then you don't have to call her anything at all." He nodded again, but this time he looked up, and there was something in his eyes. Something quietly resigned. I wanted to pull him into a hug, but I didn't. He wasn't a little boy anymore, and I was afraid that if I did, I might fall apart. Later that morning, Nate came into our room holding a garment bag. "I thought you might wear this," he said, lifting the hanger. "It's the one Mom got you last Christmas." I looked at the cream silk through the plastic. Minimalist, sleek, expensive. Everything Margaret liked, everything I wasn't. "I was thinking of wearing the beige one," I said. Nate gave me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's just one dinner." "That's what you said last year, and the year before." He didn't answer. He never did when it came to his family. Instead, he kissed my temple and went to iron his shirt. I dressed slowly, mind swirling with the mental checklist of tomorrow. What to say, what not to say. How to protect Ethan without making a scene. Again. Always again. Around noon, I came downstairs to find Ethan scrolling through something on his phone. He looked up when I entered, like he'd been caught. "You okay?" I asked. He hesitated, then handed me the phone. "Just listen." I took it from him. On the screen, a single audio file, titled December Call. I pressed play. Margaret's voice came through, clipped and crystalline, the tone she used when she thought no one important was listening. "He's not really part of us. He's Lauren's, not ours." A short laugh followed, dry, almost amused. Then silence, the kind that stretches, waiting for you to pretend you didn't hear it. My hands clenched around the phone. I looked at Ethan. He didn't look angry, just hollow. "How long have you had this?" I asked. He shrugged. "Since December." My voice cracked. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I thought you already knew." I did. Deep down, I did. But hearing it, her voice, that statement, it was like being slapped across the face with something you'd tried to ignore for too long. "I didn't want to make it worse," he said. "You didn't make it worse, sweetheart. I just needed you to hear it, so you wouldn't think I was imagining it." I didn't respond. I couldn't. I sat there with the phone still in my hand like it weighed 50 pounds. After a while, he stood and turned to leave. Before he reached the stairs, he looked back at me. "You heard it too now?" I nodded, eyes stinging. He nodded back like that was all he needed, and disappeared down the hall. The rest of the day moved like molasses. I made dinner. Nate complimented the seasoning. We didn't talk about the dress or the audio or anything real. I watched Ethan eat half his meal and excuse himself. Nate didn't notice. Or maybe he did, but chose not to ask. That night, I lay awake next to my husband, staring at the ceiling, wondering how many years I'd spent trying to prove we belonged. Wondering how much of that effort, his tie a little crooked. "You didn't have to get ready so early," I said. I couldn't sleep. I sat beside him at the table, reaching for his tie and adjusting it gently. He let me. "Do you still want to go tomorrow?" "Not really, but I think I need to." It wasn't a dinner, it was an audition. Every chair, every smile, every glass of wine felt rehearsed. The gravel under our tires crackled as we pulled up to the Barrington estate. The house loomed with its stone facade and immaculately trimmed hedges, casting long shadows under the late afternoon sky. A valet in a crisp uniform opened the passenger door for me with a smile that barely touched his eyes. Another opened Ethan's door. My son stepped out in his navy button-up, hands buried in his coat pockets, shoulders slightly drawn. Nate adjusted his cufflinks as we approached the grand entrance. He looked polished, at ease. This was his native language, effortless formality. Margaret's voice echoed in my memory. Tradition is everything. We don't bend it just because someone marries in. That was at brunch 2 years ago, over mimosas and lemon scones. She'd said it casually, like commenting on the weather, but I'd felt it like a cold slap. Now, that same chill settled over my skin. Inside, the air smelled like white lilies and wealth. The entryway glowed under soft gold chandeliers. Chloe descended the staircase just as we entered, wearing a silk dress that clung like armor. "Lauren," she said, leaning in for a kiss on the cheek that missed by half an inch. "That color suits you." Her eyes dropped to my shoes, then to my clutch, then back up. Cataloging, ranking. "Mom will be thrilled you wore something classic." "It's nice to see you, Chloe," I replied evenly. She turned to Ethan with a smile that was more gesture than feeling. "Look at you, so grown up." Then, to her own son across the room. "We'll get you a sharper jacket next week, darling, something tailored." Ethan's face didn't change, but his hand found mine. The seating chart was displayed on a polished wooden easel near the ballroom entrance. White cardstock with gold-embossed names, arranged in perfect symmetry. I scanned the cards. Lauren Parker, Nathaniel Barrington. Ethan's name wasn't there. My throat tightened. I quickly flipped the page on the second panel. Nothing. No Ethan Parker, no placeholder, not even a misspelling. Ethan stepped forward quietly, eyes narrowing. "It's probably just a printing mistake," I said too quickly. He didn't say anything, just stood there looking at the board as if it might change under pressure. Margaret appeared moments later, sweeping into the room like a general on review. Her hair was lacquered into submission, her lips painted the color of old wine. "Lauren," she said with a nod that could freeze rivers, "I see you found your place." "Yes," I said, although I think there may have been a small mistake. "Trevor's in charge of the printing this year," she cut in smoothly. "And with so many guests, it's easy to forget the details." Then she pivoted to Chloe without waiting for my reply. Ethan didn't move. I gently guided him toward the table. The dining hall glittered under massive chandeliers, crystal glasses already filled, silverware gleaming beside bone-white plates. A 14-seat oak table stretched the length of the room, each chair set like a throne awaiting judgment. Nate found his place easily, beside Chloe and opposite Margaret. Mine was 3 seats down. Ethan's was nowhere. A folded napkin and unused chair at the far end told us everything we needed to know. He sat without a word. As I made my way to the powder room before dinner began, I passed by the study door, ajar just enough to catch voices. He's not going on the list. Margaret's voice. Clear. Calm. I stopped short, ears straining. He's not blood. That legacy is for true heirs. A man's voice responded. Measured. Legal. I understand, but Nathaniel might contest. He won't, she snapped. He never has. I stepped back, heart pounding, careful not to make a sound. My dress suddenly felt too tight. By the time I returned, the first course had been served. Ethan was sipping water, his fork untouched. Chloe's son, Liam, was beaming, clutching something small in his palm. A Barrington heirloom, Chloe announced with flair. Trevor's grandfather wore it to his first board meeting. She turned to Margaret, who gave an approving nod. He'll carry our name forward, Margaret said. Her gaze didn't drift to Ethan once. He sat perfectly still. I watched him trace the edge of his napkin like earlier that morning, but now there was no nervousness, only calculation. Chloe laughed at something Trevor said. Nate joined in, somewhat forced. I stared at my plate, untouched. Ethan leaned toward me, voice quiet enough for only me to hear. I think I'm done trying. I turned to him. His eyes were dull, like someone had turned off a light behind them. I know, I whispered. Dessert was brought out in silver domes. Chocolate torte, raspberry glaze, spun sugar. Ethan didn't touch his. Margaret raised her glass, silver ring catching the chandelier light. To family, she said, smiling. To those who carry our blood with pride. I glanced at Ethan. He was staring at his untouched plate. She said it like she was swatting a fly. Not cruel, not loud, just final. Margaret lifted her glass and let the room settle around her, as though silence was a resource she owned. Background music faded into a hush. Even the clinking of silverware paused mid-bite. Her voice glided over the table like the blade of a well-kept knife. I was just saying, she began, smiling thinly, that family is the cornerstone of legacy. That's why it's so important to preserve the bloodline. Nate stiffened beside her. Chloe glanced at her wine, then at Liam, who was twirling the Barrington heirloom watch on his wrist like it was a toy and not a declaration of lineage. Trevor made a polite noise, halfway between a cough and a chuckle, and stared too long at his plate. Margaret's gaze swept the table, lingering briefly on each face, until it landed on Ethan. Well, she said, tilting her head ever so slightly. He's not really one of us anyway. She took a sip of her wine. No one moved. It was like someone had cracked the air. The chandelier shimmered but gave off no warmth. The room contracted. Glasses hovered midair, forks frozen. A few eyes flicked to Nate, who said nothing. Chloe's smile faltered. I saw her hand tremble slightly as she reached for her water. Trevor looked anywhere but at me. Ethan didn't flinch. He simply reached for his napkin and folded it beside his plate. The motion was slow, careful, like he wanted to give the room time to notice. Then he stood. At 13, he was still small for his age, barely 5'2". But in that moment, he was the tallest person in the room. He didn't look at me. He didn't need to. He looked directly at Margaret. And the room held its breath. Good, he said, voice steady, calm, because I don't want to be part of you. The words landed like thunder, soft, low, but with the kind of power that comes from knowing you're finally done holding back. He took a step forward, his shoes soundless on the hardwood, and continued. I've tried since I was 6. I've tried everything. Being polite, showing up, smiling when no one smiled back. I thought if I acted right, if I wore the stupid clothes and laughed at the boring stories, maybe you'd finally see me. He glanced briefly at Chloe. Her face had gone pale. I'm done pretending you're better than us. His voice didn't crack. His hands didn't shake. He wasn't angry. He was finished. There was a long pause. Nate's hand twitched on the tablecloth, his jaw tight. Margaret blinked like she hadn't quite understood what had just happened. Like the boy she'd ignored for nearly a decade had suddenly turned into someone she couldn't control. "I didn't mean it that way," she said, faltering. "It was just—" "You did," Ethan cut in, still calm. "And even if you didn't, you said it like you did. You always do." No one moved. Even the waitstaff stood frozen near the doorway, sensing something had shifted that no tray of dessert could fix. Ethan turned to Chloe next. "You let her say things like that and act like it's not your fault. But it is." Then to Trevor. "You laugh when you're uncomfortable. It doesn't make you harmless." He looked last at Nate. "My husband. His father." The room tightened around us, every eye swinging to Nate like a spotlight. And then Ethan said it. "Dad, if you don't say anything now, I'll know exactly what you chose. For 13 years, I begged peace to keep our family whole. My son bought our dignity back in one sentence. And my husband finally stood up." The room remained still, like someone had drawn a curtain over the sound. Forks hovered inches from plates. No one chewed, no one spoke. Breathing, it seemed, had become optional. Margaret's expression was unreadable, locked between offense and confusion, her perfectly painted mouth slightly open, like the words she wanted to summon had forgotten her. Nate's hands were resting on the table, fingers curled just enough to tremble. His knuckles had gone white. Beside him, Ethan stood like marble, silent, composed, his words still echoing in the space he now owned. "If you don't say anything now, I'll know exactly what you chose." Margaret laughed. Short, brittle, a crack disguised as charm. "I didn't mean it that way," she said, lifting her wine glass again, as though she could sip her way out of this. Ethan didn't move. "You always do." The words landed like a quiet slap. Not loud, just undeniable. Chloe cleared her throat and leaned forward, smile returning like a reflex. "So, how's school, Ethan? I heard you were working on a robotics project." "Don't," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Her eyes flicked to me. I met them, steady, not angry, just done. She leaned back. I turned my gaze to Nate. He was still staring at the table, eyes unfocused, like he was searching for an escape route inside the wood grain. My breath caught in my throat. For a second, I thought he would stay silent. Again. But then, slowly, he pushed back his chair and stood. The room seemed to tilt. He looked down at Ethan, placed a hand gently on his shoulder. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "You're right." Ethan didn't react. He just waited, like he needed to see how far Nate would go. Nate turned to his mother. "If this table can't see Ethan as family, then this table no longer defines mine." No one moved. Trevor coughed softly. Chloe pressed her lips together and looked at her plate. Margaret's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The matriarch, the queen of posture and politeness, had finally been stripped of her lines. Nate's voice didn't rise. He didn't plead or accuse. He simply stated the truth like it had always been there, waiting for someone to say it aloud. "I've spent years pretending your silence wasn't cruelty, that your distance wasn't rejection. I let Lauren and Ethan carry the weight of your standards while I kept my hands clean." His hand remained on Ethan's shoulder. "I thought if we kept showing up, we'd eventually be allowed in. But we were never actually invited, were we? Just tolerated." Margaret opened her mouth again, but the sound that came out was a breath too soft to count. "You made me believe that keeping the peace meant staying quiet. That's not peace. That's erasure." I could feel my chest tighten, every word cracking something open inside me. I didn't want to cry, but I could feel it rising, thick and hot, behind my eyes. Nate turned to me then. His face was clearer than I'd seen it in years. "Let's go." And for the first time, he meant it. No yelling, no slamming doors. Just 3 people rising slowly from a table that had stopped feeding them long ago. The chairs made the slightest sound as they scraped against the hardwood. It was the only noise in the room. No one told us to stay. No one asked us to sit back down. They all just watched. The same way they'd always watched, like we were actors on a stage, performing a part they never intended to applaud. I rose first. My napkin slid from my lap to the floor. I didn't pick it up. Ethan stepped away from his chair with the same quiet precision he always used. Grace without performance. Nate stood beside him, not touching him this time, but closer than he'd ever been. I saw his hand twitch, like he was resisting the urge to reach for something. Not out of fear, out of guilt maybe, out of grief for the years he'd let slide. We walked toward the entrance hall, past portraits of people with thin mouths and wide shoulders, oil paintings hung like declarations of purity and power. The Barrington bloodline, gilded in mahogany frames. Not a single one of them looked like my son. Behind us, I heard the clinking of cutlery as someone finally dared to pick up a fork. Murmurs rippled faintly. Chloe whispering something to Trevor, Margaret saying nothing. Just the hush of a woman whose kingdom had just been quietly vacated. We stepped outside into a fine spring drizzle. Not a downpour, just enough to blur the edges of the driveway lights and mist our coats. It felt good. That kind of wet. Like a reset. Ethan didn't pull up his hood. He walked tall, chin up, as though the water made him stronger. Nate unlocked the car with a quiet beep. We climbed in. Ethan in the back, me in the passenger seat. For a moment, no one spoke. The car was filled with silence, but not the heavy kind we used to swim in. This one was lighter, like breathing room. Nate started the engine but didn't pull away right away. His hands stayed on the steering wheel. 10 and 2. Standard. Safe. Ethan leaned his head against the window, watching the rain trail patterns across the glass. His fingers twitched in his lap. I glanced back at him. You okay? He didn't answer right away. Then softly. Yeah. Just tired. We drove a few minutes, the trees along the side of the road blurred in dusk and drizzle. The lights from the estate faded in the rearview mirror. I didn't look back. Halfway down the highway, Nate pulled over onto the shoulder. His shoulders rose and fell in a slow, deliberate breath. He didn't look at either of us when he spoke. I already moved the accounts. I turned to him. What? He kept staring ahead. Last week, before the dinner, Ethan's name is on everything that matters now. Joint trusts, investment portfolios, life insurance. Not hers, not the family board. I blinked. He finally looked at me. If legacy means blood, then I'm done with legacy. He reached for my hand. His fingers were cold but steady. I didn't know how to say it until now, but I knew. I've known for a while. Behind us, Ethan shifted. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His eyes met mine. He didn't smile, but something in his face loosened, like he finally let go of a weight he had been holding for too long. Nate pulled the car back onto the road, merging into the sparse evening traffic. None of us said much for the next 10 minutes. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I slid it out and looked at the screen. A message from Chloe. He shouldn't have had to say it. I'm sorry I stayed quiet. I used to think family was something you had to earn. Turns out it's something you choose, and something that chooses you back. The morning sunlight poured gently through the kitchen window, pale gold against the tile. The scent of scrambled eggs filled the air, warm and grounding. I moved slowly as I cooked, letting the silence stretch. Not the brittle kind we used to live in, but the soft kind. The kind that lets you exhale. Ethan shuffled in wearing mismatched socks and one of Nate's old hoodies, his curls still sleep-mussed. He headed straight for the cupboard, humming under his breath as he reached for the glasses. Juice sloshed a little as he poured, but he didn't flinch. It was the first sound of ease I'd heard from him in weeks. I watched him from the stove, spatula paused mid-air, remembering the line he'd spoken at that table. His voice steady, his back straight. I'm done pretending you're better than us. It echoed now, not with bitterness, but with clarity. Nate joined us a few minutes later, still in a t-shirt and sweats, barefoot, coffee already in hand. He leaned against the counter like he'd done it every morning of our lives. Only now, the tension he used to carry in his jaw was gone. We didn't speak much. Just passed plates, clinked forks, took our time. After breakfast, Nate disappeared down the hall. When he came back, he was holding a wide black frame, one that used to hang in his father's study. Inside was a vintage Barrington photo. Sepia-toned, stoic-faced men in military dress, women in lace collars. No smiles. He set it on the counter, slid out the back panel, and carefully removed the photograph. Then he reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded printout. I recognized it instantly. A candid from last summer at Cape Cod. Ethan between us, drenched from the ocean, hair sticking up in saltwater spikes. Nate's arm around my shoulder, my head tipped back in laughter. He slid the photo into the frame. "It belongs here now," he said. Ethan stepped closer, studying the image. "I look short," he said, grinning. "You were," Nate replied. Ethan looked up at me. "Can I show you something?" He darted down the hall and returned a minute later with a sheet of paper. He unfolded it slowly and laid it flat on the table. A hand-drawn family tree. At the top, 2 names, Lauren and Nate. Below them, just one branch. Ethan. No extra lines, no dotted connections. Just us. I stared at it, throat tight. "You made this?" I whispered. He nodded. "Last night." I touched the paper like it might vanish. I think we spent too long asking for a seat at a table that was never ours. You've chosen poverty. Don't expect us to support your delusions. That's what my mother said to me the moment I told her I wasn't funding my sister's spiritual retreat. If you've ever been quietly cut off by your own family, branded selfish for choosing yourself, keep watching. This story is for you. The rain hadn't stopped since I crossed the county line. Colorado in late October was always unpredictable. Sometimes golden, sometimes cruel. Today, it chose the latter. The mountain road twisted like it wanted to throw me off, but I kept going until the trees thinned and the outline of the house appeared through the mist. My house. Mine. It sagged like it had given up decades ago. The siding peeled in long strips like shedding skin, windows boarded in a half-hearted attempt to stop the wind from claiming what was left. Moss crawled across the front porch as if it, too, was trying to escape. But the mailbox still bore a crooked Blake, the only part of my family that followed me here. I killed the engine and just sat, hands still on the wheel, watching the wipers push back the world. My breath fogged the inside of the windshield. I should have felt something. Pride, fear, relief. All I felt was quiet, not peace, just absence. A week ago, I had been at my parents' dinner table, carving roast beef that tasted like drywall and listening to Mom gush over Madeline's upcoming healing retreat. $15,000 to reset her energy in Sedona. She said it like she was announcing a wedding. "She needs this, Eleanor," Mom had said, dabbing her mouth with the cloth napkin like the words might stain her lips. "After everything she's done for this family." Madeline sipped her wine and smiled like a saint being canonized. I had nodded, chewed, swallowed. And then Dad looked at me. "You said you were transferring the money last week. What's the delay?" I'd set my fork down. Calm, controlled. "I didn't transfer the money. I bought something." Silence. Madeline froze, her glass suspended midair. Mom blinked once, slow and calculating. "What do you mean you bought something?" A house, I said. It's a fixer-upper, but it's mine. They hadn't raised their voices. They never did. That would require acknowledging me directly. Instead, Madeline had laughed, small and sharp. You bought a dump instead of helping me reset? That's so on brand for you. I tried to respond, but Mom spoke over me, her voice soaked in disappointment. You've chosen poverty. Don't expect us to support your delusions. Dad lifted his hand like a judge passing sentence. You want to be on your own? Be completely on your own. The next morning, my name was gone from the family group chat. Just like that. Plans for Thanksgiving? Canceled. For me, at least. The gravel crunched beneath my boots as I stepped out into the cold. I opened the trunk and dragged out the fold-up chair, the one I used for writing breaks when I still had clients and deadlines. It felt heavier now, like it knew this wasn't about rest. I set it down facing the porch and sat. The wind tugged at my coat and the smell of wet earth clung to everything. I didn't cry. I hadn't since I left. Not when I passed the Welcome to Pine Hollow sign. Not when the heater in my car died an hour outside town. And not now, staring at the place everyone thought was a joke. I reached into the side pocket of my backpack and pulled out the photo frame I hadn't looked at since packing. The edges were worn, the glass cracked diagonally across the front. I didn't turn it over. This house wasn't a punishment. It was the only choice that ever belonged to me. My phone buzzed against my thigh. I pulled it out with the dull reflex of someone expecting nothing good. One message. Don't come to Thanksgiving. Not welcome. Mom, I stared at it for a long time, thumb hovering over the delete icon,